So I've been sitting with something that feels uncomfortable. You see, I've been building this podcast around honesty, around opening up, especially as a father. And yet I've noticed that even for me, being truly honest gets really hard when things aren't going well. And that's what this episode is about. This one is for the dads, for the men who are trying to hold it together, who feel pressure to provide, to lead, to stay strong, and who find themselves staying quiet when things start to feel, shaky. And not because they don't want to be honest, but because honesty feels risky, especially when almost your whole identity is tied to how well things are going. So in this episode, I kind of want to explore that tension. I'm going to share a bit about a period in my life where I left my full-time job. I went all in on building something of my own. And a couple of years later, found myself in a place where, things weren't financially stable. My mindset wasn't right and shame started creeping in. And this is not to try and give you a success story of some sort or to give you answers. No, that's not what this is about. It's to look at the question underneath it all. Like why it can feel so hard for men, especially fathers, to be honest when things aren't going well, even when we say honesty is important. But before I go any further, just in case you are new here, this is the Body of Work podcast. I'm Andy. I'm a father, a husband, and someone working on building a meaningful life. Showing up for my family, staying physically and emotionally fit and grounded, and unlearning some of the patterns I picked up along the way. And this podcast isn't about speaking from the finish line. It's about documenting the work that's being done right here from the middle. So I want this podcast to be about honesty. And yet, if I'm being really honest and straight up with you, I still find honesty quite hard, especially in this podcast setting. And I don't mean it like I find honesty hard, like I'd rather lie. But I guess it's more so finding it hard to really open up more because even now, as I'm recording this, I'm noticing myself wondering, okay, so, what should I say or what should I not say? And I know for me, the struggle really lives in that space of, where's the line between honesty, opening up and oversharing. And just naming that tension right there, that struggle, I mean, that alone says something. Because being transparent about what you're feeling, about what you've experienced, it's not easy, heck, like it's really freaking hard. And I think I'm sharing this right up front because I want to normalize that struggle, the struggle of wanting to open up, but feeling that, that resistance, that not at the same time. Because the truth is when we do push or, when I do push myself to that point of opening up, that's where the deep connection starts to happen. That's how real relationships are actually built. And just like I'm trying to connect with you through this podcast, I know that honesty, like real honesty, being transparent is the only way to do that. And it's not perfection. It's not even having the right words, but it's being willing to say what's actually there. Like when I look back at my story a few years ago, I can see this really clear moment where I made a decision. I decided to leave my full-time job to work for myself, to explore entrepreneurship more seriously. And at the time, I was experiencing all of the emotions you can think about. I was excited, I was afraid, but at the same time too, I was hopeful. Because the years before that, I was working a full-time job while trying to juggle different side hustles. And that just wasn't working out the way that, I hoped it would. So I finally told myself, all right, I'm going to take the risk. Because I had that mindset of you will never really know until you give it a try. And I also didn't want to live with that weight of regret, knowing I didn't even give myself the opportunity to find out what's possible or not, of course. I didn't want to look back one day and think, what if? So I left my job, and honestly, part of that decision was about proving something, right? Proving something to myself and, to my partner. You see, I've always had this drive to be self-sufficient, not necessarily financially independent per se, but to be and feel financially confident. Like, I can do this, like I can provide and I can figure things out, quote unquote, on my own, right? But then a couple of years later, I found myself in a very different place. Things weren't stable, and that instability brought a lot with it. I felt ashamed. I felt like I had failed myself, like I had failed in business and entrepreneurship, like I had let my wife down. And what made it even heavier was this thought that after 2 years, I didn't feel like I had much to show for it. And the idea that I might have to look for employment again, like that hit my identity really hard. So in the months leading up to that decision, I got super quiet. When people asked me, how things were going, I did what most men tend to do. I kept a brave face. And I'd often find myself saying like, yeah, things are going pretty good. Even when they clearly weren't. And part of me kept telling myself, okay, you know what? It'll turn around. But I realized that I wasn't actually telling people the truth. I had a really hard time just saying, yeah, things aren't going so well. And I know now that that silence, that pulling inward and kind of keeping to myself, that feeling, like that was shame. And that felt really easy to do. So I kept it to myself and I just got real quiet again. So now when I look back, I can start to see a few patterns emerging. And I want to be clear, what I'm about to share is a realization I'm recently having. It's something I'm still sitting with. I don't have it fully figured out yet. But just to give some context, when I first went full-time working for myself, I started with web design. Like that was the thing, that was my thing. And honestly, it started off going pretty well. I was drawn to it because it allowed me to help other businesses, help people solve real problems. And at the same time, I could use my creativity as well. Like I really wanted to lean into my creative side. And that part mattered to me a lot. And then about 6 months in, as part of that work, I started creating content online. I had to speak on camera, something I found really hard at first to do, but slowly I got better at it. And somewhere in that process, I felt this pull toward content itself. So I started a podcast originally as a way to document my entrepreneurial journey. And I was genuinely excited about it. And that podcast is actually this podcast that you're listening to. And then about 4 months after starting it, I noticed something else. I realized I really love the content side of things. And I felt like this was something I could help more people with. So I started a community focused on helping people build confidence on camera. And again, that came from a real place, a genuine desire to help, a genuine curiosity. But when I look back, I can also see something else happening alongside that. I started to avoid the harder parts of whatever I was doing at the time. With web design, when it became harder to get clients, when things slowed down, I noticed my motivation fading as well. And I told myself it was a lack of passion. With the podcast, I love the recording. I love recording the episodes, but the editing, consistency, the repetitive parts, like that started to feel tedious. And then when I got excited about building the community, that spark pulled me forward again. So on the surface, it looks like I was just following my curiosity, following meaning, things that felt meaningful, wanting to do fulfilling work. And that is all true. But here's the part I'm still, kind of sitting with. A mentor of mine recently called me out on something and it landed it landed pretty hard. He said that often people use passion as an excuse for their ability to tolerate frustration, to tolerate boredom, to tolerate hardship. And when I really reflected on that, I could see myself in it, not in a way that makes me want to attack myself, but in a way that makes me pause, right? Because I can see how at times when things got really difficult or when they got boring, I might have used this idea of losing passion as a justification to ease off and move towards something that felt more exciting in that moment. And again, I don't want to dismiss the genuine reasons why I pursue the things I pursue, because curiosity matters to me like a ton. Like doing something meaningful matters to me. Being of service to others matters to me. But I also can't ignore the pattern. And again, I'm still sitting with that, trying to understand it without turning it into a story about something, being wrong, quote unquote, with me, right? When I take a step back and look at everything I've shared, I can't help but sit with a few questions. And, they are pretty big questions. Like why was it so hard for me to be honest when things weren't going well? Even though I wanted to be, why did honesty feel so risky, Because when you step into this role, this desire of wanting to provide, not necessarily being the sole provider in, some old school sense, but wanting to provide, wanting to be competent, wanting to feel solid. Why does it feel like you're going to lose something if you admit, it's not going well right now? And that kind of leads me into the next question of, what is it that makes silence feel safer than just telling the truth? Because as men, we talk about wanting to be strong, courageous, and you would think that courage would look like telling the truth, just basically saying it like it is, right? Whatever is on your mind, whatever it is that you're feeling. But for some reason, when things start slipping, a lot of us go inward. We keep it to ourselves. We put on a brave face. We try to carry it alone. And that brings me to this next question of, that I'm also sitting with, which is, why is it that so many men, and I've definitely seen this in myself, wait until we hit a breaking point to then finally speak? Like we wait until we go past the red line, until we crash, until we hit some version of rock bottom. And then only after the fact we're able to be honest. And I don't have all the answers to this, but I also wonder, does this pressure get heavier, once you become a father? Because now it's not just you, right? Now you've got people relying on you. So maybe the stakes feel higher. Maybe the shame feels, sharper. And again, I'm not sharing these questions because I have them all figured out. I'm sharing them because I want you to sit with them too. Not to force answers, but just to notice what do they stir up in you? Like, what do these questions bring up? How do they make you feel? Because I honestly believe sometimes just asking the right question out loud is already a form of honesty. And what I want to do now is I want to give you what I didn't have, what I never really got when I was going through all of this. And that's permission. Permission to feel, permission to understand that as a man and as a father, you're allowed to express your emotions. Even the ones that don't fit this narrow idea of what masculinity is supposed to look like, strong, bold, unshaken. Those emotions aren't excluded from you. Because strength and softness or gentleness, they actually live side by side. And Being transparent about how you feel, like that's not weakness. If anything, it's courage. I can personally speak to the fear that comes up when I want to be really honest about something I'm feeling. That fear of how it might be perceived, how it might land and come across. But courage, it's often said, right, that courage isn't the absence of fear, right? Courage is feeling that fear and doing it anyway and choosing to speak anyway. And another thing I want to say here is that you don't need to be certain about everything in order to be honest. You're allowed to say, what you're going through. You're allowed to say what you're feeling. You're also allowed to say, heck, like I don't even know yet. And that yet, in I don't know yet, like it matters because it means you're willing to take the time to understand what you're feeling, where is it coming from, and what you actually want to express. And there's something I came across recently that like it really stuck with me. And it's this. It was the opposite of depression is expression. And I'll say that again. The opposite of depression is expression because when you keep things in, they build and they build and they build. And when too much stays inside, it creates a kind of dis-ease in your system, in your body. And when you're not at ease, things start to break down. You see, silence doesn't heal shame, it protects it. And every time you go inward and stay silent, you reinforce that shame. However, honesty, on the other hand, it does the opposite. It loosens it. It creates space. So what I basically really want to offer you here is this. You're human first and a man second. And you're allowed to feel every emotion that comes with being human. So if you're struggling with, being more emotionally transparent, if you're finding it hard to be honest about how you really feel and you notice yourself wanting to stay silent, even though you know that expressing what you're really feeling would probably be more helpful, like just know you're not broken. You might hear parts of this and think, damn, like why is this so hard for me? And if that's you, what I want to give you is this, is be compassionate with yourself, brother. Because a big part of this journey isn't about fixing yourself. It's about becoming aware. Awareness is a huge thing because once something is brought into your awareness, you actually now have a choice to do something about it. And that's way different from beating yourself up and asking, why am I like this? Or saying, why can't I do better? So here's a simple question I want you to sit with. If another brother that you know was sitting across from you sharing the same struggle, the same things that you're dealing with right now, how would you respond to him? How would you respond to him? I'm guessing, right? And I can only assume, but I'm guessing you'd meet him with a lot more compassion that you're giving yourself, that you're meeting yourself with. So that's what I'm saying. Give yourself that same grace, the same understanding, the same patience, because you're not alone in this. Like, I'll be the first to say, I'm walking this path too. Like, this is ongoing work for me as well. We're not meant to be perfect. We're meant to be willing, right? Willing to do the work, willing to be a little more honest than we were yesterday. And for me, this is part of my body of work. And if it resonates with you, then this is the start of your body of work too. And before I close this out, I just want to mention this. I created a space called the Soil Brotherhood. It's a space for men who want to work on being more emotionally expressive, be more emotionally transparent, more honest, more present in the relationships that matter the most to them. with their kids, with their partner, with their community, the relationships that really mean something. And so if that sounds like you, if that sounds like something you would want to explore, I'll leave the link down in the description. You're more than welcome to join. And with that said, all that's left for me to say is take care of yourself, brother, and have compassion for yourself. And I'll talk to you soon.